So this evening we are embarking upon the first night of Mastery School. I'm glad you have decided to join us. I see those of you who are in the Zoom room. We probably will be joined a little later by others who are catching up. I am not on YouTube tonight. This Tuesday nights will not be on YouTube. They're intentionally and deliberately set aside for those who go the extra mile. That is to come into this sacred space where you can be identified and where we can talk about it, where we can share, where we can grow together, where we can expand together. So I'm happy to see all of you who are here tonight. Tonight, we're going to start, this will be probably part one of probably two parts as we continue to deal with the topic of creation, dealing with the topic of who is man, what is man. And we want to start by dealing with the topic of who is the let us. Oftentimes we skip right over that. And until we make a connection to the let us, we just won't have the key to unlock the mysteries of this which is being shared with you all tonight. So we're going to jump right on in tonight into the night's teachings. Often you hear amongst or inside of our community individuals saying that they're kings, that they're queens, that they're gods. But when you look at their lives, it's not reflective of one who is a king or a queen, less known a god. But we want to get a understanding of what this concept projects to potentiality. The potentiality that we all have to be kings and queens, or pharaohs, or a better word than pharaohs is a nasut beauty, which is the word that we get our pharaoh word from, or to be known as God in the earth, for the pharaoh was a living, walking, breathing representation of God, the creator in the earth. Just as we have used the symbol of Jesus, those who have come by way of traditional Christianity, as the messenger, he represents one of so many messenger types that have come, particularly when we begin to drill down into our own history, into the ancient wisdom that is found in Africa. We find that Asar was a savior type, and Asar is not so much representative of Jesus as Asar is representative of God, who had a son by the name of Heru, and Heru is a type or forerunner of that individual that we call Jesus. Now, getting a little bit ahead of myself, but these are some of the things I want to begin to introduce to you. It's time for us to expand beyond what we have been given. It's time for us to even move beyond identifying with our phenotypes or identifying with our ethnicity, for we are spirit beings that inhabit this human body, and we have chose to come in the form of a male or female or black or white, Jew, Greek, whatever you identify with. We come into these bodies and into the systems that we're in, and it allows for us to all have a different experience, allows for source to experience itself in various forms and various manners. I want to say that no one people group is better than another people group. I'm not here to promote that black is better than white or any of those kinds of things. I understand the limitations that come with that conversation. I understand the path that conversation goes down. I understand that we as a people, those we being those who have African descent, have a lot of drama and trauma that has followed us, and somewhat can get in the way of us moving into our divine essence. When you start living inside of the limitations of your physical form, then you begin to identify solely. And when you identify with physicalness, you have limitations to who you are and what you can experience and how you can express. So I understand the concept that we are kings and queens and that we are gods. But if we want to take on the concept, let us begin to act accordingly. So welcome to Tuesday night's Mastery School. It's not a mystery school. It's a mastery school. It's not a school about amassing information, about gaining knowledge. It's not a place where you come to be inspired. It's not about inspiration. All of those things going to happen here. But it's really about transformation. It's about taking the things that we think we know and diving deeper into them or above them or beyond them into a metaphysical exploration. Here you see a cover that I had made back in February 2021. Beyond the quest for Black Jesus, deconstructing the lie. And so I'm saying that we must be willing to let go of the things we know, the things that have been near and dear to us. For our beliefs are based on what has been given to us by those who we esteem highly. You know, we believe things based on what our parents, and then as we grew older, we believe things based on what the community gave us that helped us move through. We believe things based on what we were learning in the educational institutions. We began to believe things, and those things became our operating system, our belief system. And for many of us, we've never taken time to explore the beliefs. Remember when you were a child, most concepts or many concepts were introduced to you by way of stories, myths. Stories and myths are powerful. Religion is built on myths, allegories. And there's nothing wrong with the myth or the allegory if you don't get caught up in the messengers that present them. If you understand that inside of the myth or the message is an understanding to be had. So Mastery School is about amassing understanding of information and knowledge, but more so not moving through life with this knowledge base, with this sensory base living, but you move through life as a divine spiritual being with a silent partner, walking in the spirit. And you won't please the lust of the flesh. You will not be held hostage to. But one of the things we want to learn is to present through life with balance. Man is a spirit that possesses a soul. We know that the soul is our reasoning capacity. That's our brain and our brain function. And then, so man is a spirit that possesses a brain, and he lives in a body, and he's emotionally controlled, or he has emotions that move us to action. But more importantly is a piece that we don't see that's more critical to who we are. We are a spirit being. Each of us have a spark of the divine spark, the divine fire, the divine breath is breathed into all of us. The breath that is breathed into me, the spark that is inside of me, is no different than the spark that's inside of you. It's no different than the spark that's inside of that individual who may be expressing through life with a different religious system, or even the person who does devilish things that have the spark in them. But that spark, in most cases, is suppressed. Even when we look at those who are walking through traditional religious systems, aspiring to walk upright and to do those things that are not humanly possible, but yet they're held hostage. They only have an idea, but they're not able to actualize the idea. What we're here to do is to not only know the idea or become familiar with the idea, but to know the idea. It's the truth that you know is the truth that sets you free. So as we move forward on Tuesday nights, a couple of things I want you to know. I'm not here, and I will not allow anyone who is present to bash the participants and your beliefs. Whatever your beliefs are right now, they're your beliefs. And if you're choosing to come here today, that tells me that you are in the right place. It's not a coincidence that you're here. It's a divine incidence. And that though you may not fully understand some of the things that are being shared, some of the things that I say may rub you the wrong way. And I guarantee you that a lot of things I say are going to rub you the wrong way, because at some point in my life, they rubbed me the wrong way. So we will not allow attacking of individuals who show up in this space. What I will share with you may cause cognitive dissonance. That is, your thinking is going to be going against what you think you know. And I want to also expose you not only to Kemetic spirituality, but I want to expose you to ancient wisdom teachings. So tonight we're going to cover a couple of things. We're going to cover intro to Kemetic cosmology, That is the story of creation. We're going to look at, or we're going to explore the how creation works. That is so critical because if we're created in the image after the likeness, then it's important that we begin to operate according to what we've been created after, what we're created as. We're going to look at the us of creation. On last week, a couple weeks ago, I had a revelatory knowledge, inspiration, and I questioned who is the us. I had never really questioned who was the us of creation. And the reason why I hadn't questioned the us of creation, because I was I was told that the us of creation was God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. But then as I began to give that some thought, that is very patriarchal, that is very westernized presentation of who God is. And so we want to look at who this God is, who this pantheon that represents the us is. So we're going to start unpacking that and explore that. And lastly, we want to leave tonight understanding that we are a new creation. Now, I'm going to break this up into two parts. As I began to lay some things out, I understood that it was becoming elongated, and I don't want to try to rush through it, or neither do I want to give more to you than you're ready to digest. So we're going to be together probably for the next 30 minutes because I plan to end every Tuesday night. We'll end at 7. So those of you who want to come for the teaching can come and know that by 7 it'll be over. And then we will stick around for a few minutes, 15 to 20 minutes. If there's any questions, any dialogue, if there's no questions, there's no dialogue, then class will be brought to a close. It will be recorded. You will have access to it. Now I'm going to ask, if you have access to it, I send it to you, that you not share it with anyone else, but you ask them that if they're interested in it, then they should take it upon themselves either to shoot me an email and I will freely send it to them, but I want to have a conversation with them. I want to begin to expand what I have to offer. What is happening is people are gleaning. I have a lot of voyeurs. I've run into people constantly. Last week, I was walking down the street at the end of an event, and a lady said, "You that guy?" And I was like, "What guy?" And so she said, "Oasis," and she said, "I watch you sometimes." And I told her to keep coming back. So I do have a number of people. Like I have one video that I'm gonna share with you. 3,500 people have watched the video. But there's no engagement, there's no interaction, because we live in a time where people are collecting information. I am not a purveyor of information. I'm not a purveyor of arcane knowledge. I am a teacher. I am an inspirer. I am a transformer. So and that only comes by way of relationships. So let's look at some things. So the webinars, every Tuesday night, registrants only. I also will provide you with supplemental reference and teaching materials. A lot of the materials that I will provide you with are vetted, meaning that I have read them, I have explored them. There are some things I will not refer to you. You may have them already. And if you ask me why I don't refer certain materials, I will tell you why. Usually because it's maybe antiquated, it is skewed, or it has never been vetted properly. This is a learning environment. That means it's safe to ask questions. We grow by inquiry. We grow by asking, like catechism is learning by questions. And this ministry is supported by your free will offering. That may be you give something. At the very least, I would love to see those who participate sow a seed at least once a month. For some, if you're not part of the partnership that's going to be offered, you may say, well, whenever I show up, I will sow a seed. And I want to say I appreciate that. If you've been served anything of value, I would appreciate you reciprocating it. The seed sown shows that there's value. No seed shown sometimes make you feel as there's no value, because the things that are valuable to us, we don't just give them away. So tonight, why are you here? That's a question that I want you to ask yourself. Perhaps it was something that was reflected in the email. Perhaps it's been a burning question that you believe is going to get answered. But I want you to know why you chose to show up here tonight. My journey. I've been in this conversation, in this seeking role for, it's probably started when I was 8, 9, 10, when I'm aware of it, when I became conscious of that I was seeking to know the deeper things of the universe. And then after I got my master's degree in 1987, I began to explore, because I was in the field of psychology. And when I began to study, look up the term psychology, Saku is the study of the spirit, according to the ancient Kemetic texts and teaching, where psychology is the study of the they say they study the mind, but they don't study the mind. Psychologists, Western psychology studies human behavior. It studies the brain, brain function, how it operates. But the brain is not the mind. The brain is not the spirit. Another word, I'm recapitulating now. Another word for mind is spirit. Some people say subconscious, conscious. And we're going to look at why I'm not really buying into the idea of subconscious and consciousness. I do buy into levels of awareness. So my journey started many years ago, while I was pastoring a traditional Word of Faith church. And many things that I was aware of, I could not teach to the general audience because they weren't ready. They weren't there yet. And you may say, who are you to say, well, Spirit told me. I was barely there. And how can I take someone somewhere where I had not really been? So it was a time of learning for myself. So we're starting this journey, and it's the Kemetic genesis of Christianity. Most of those who follow me, most of those who will be on this feed, will be individuals who have at some point in time had a very intimate walk with traditional Christianity, or they may be individuals who never had a walk with Christianity, like a lot of the new generations that I'm engaging. They have never really experienced church, so they don't have a lot of unlearning to do. This is a unique group of people. And so let us get started tonight. When we talk about the Kemetic genesis of Christianity, we find that the Kemetic genesis of Christianity is found in the book of Genesis. Although when we read Genesis, the book of beginnings, this book is one of 5 books that is supposedly given to us, penned to us by Moses. And so the question becomes, how can one pen something that tells a story before you were even present, and then continue to pen it after you're gone? Well, one of the things we must understand, that if you believe in the penning of this story by Moses, I don't believe there was an individual called Moses. I believe there was Amenhotep, and he was ultimately identity theft, stolen. His identity was stolen and crafted into this individual we call Moses. And so that's important that you know. A reference point on that would be even Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud wrote a book in regards to the Moses of Genesis being Akhenaten. I'm sorry, that's Akhenaten. So when we begin to look at the book of Genesis, we must understand that at its foundation, it's a Kemetic story. But if you have no familiarity with Kemetic stories, Kemetic mythology, Kemetic or Egyptian history, now I use the term Kemetic versus Egyptian because the term Egyptology was a term that was coined by the early Europeans who went into that place they labeled Egypt, and they began to rob the place. So then within the last 50, 60 years, we, individuals of African descent, the ancestry of the Kemetic people, have began to go back and reclaimed the wells of old and began to do digs and research. You have your Dr. Ben, Dr. Van Sertima, you have your Dr. Henry Clark, you got just these are just a few people to name. And then with relatively recent history, you got your people like the brother Kaba Hiawatha Kamene. You have the other brother who Infadishi. You have he's from Chicago, the brother from Chicago, his name on the tip of my tongue. He's doing some digs. And so we have a lot of contemporary people who have been doing some research, and a lot of the research that's been found goes contrary to the stories we've been given. We're going to start talking about, when we talk about God, this whole concept of God. The word God is a German word, recent in orientation. The word God is generic in that it in meaning, but it takes on the meaning we give it because of the Catholic Church and the job it has done when the Gutenberg press came along and it began to print the Bibles. It began to authenticate what books would go into the Bible and the terminology there and the preaching that was authorized. They began to use terms, even though the stories that they have came from the Jewish or the Israelites, and it talked about names of God such as Yahweh. It talks about the name of God like Jehovah Jireh, even though that's questionable because the letter J is a contemporary letter. It's not, I think it was the 16th century when the letter J comes into full usage. So we see this God concept. Well, the Egyptians, or I like to say our ancestors, the Nile Valley people, they had a creation story that we get our creation story from. Now, many of you may have theologians that you are aware of, and they may not even know this information. But then on the other side, there's a lot of traditional pastors who are truly theologians who are familiar with this, but they will not teach it because it will be a bread trail back to away from what feeds many of them. So you might say, why don't many other pastors teach this thing? Because most pastors that you know are not bivocational. I mean, they solely live by what the church gives them, the crowd they draw. So they are going to have to teach what has been, the people are able to palate. Because if they teach anything contrary, people will begin to leave the pews. And if people leave the pews, then that impacts the bottom line of their homes and their budgets. So we ask ourselves, why isn't this taught? Well, we live in a day and age where the word says there's going to come a day when the rocks will cry out, that knowledge would increase, and people have information everywhere. People are on information overload. Problem is, many people don't know how to vet the information that they do have. So this individual, Ptah, let me go back. When you look at this individual, who or what image is similar to this? And if you got an idea, go ahead and type it into the feed. If this image looks like something that you've seen, go ahead, if you would, and type it into the feed. If you are familiar with this image or seen it presented in contemporary times. Well, the image that you're looking at is a similar, or the Oscar that we give to our actors is so similar to this. Now, they say that those who have created this, who created the Oscar, that it had nothing to do with it. But I find it quite strange because the Oscar represents an actor, and the best actors are creatives. And this individual is Ptah. the God of creation. Now, I'm using the word God because you're familiar with it. But as you move forward, another word, I won't use God, I'll use probably source, divine intelligence, supreme being. I'll use many words other than God because God is generic and it brings forth too many things that ties us to religion. But the Kemetic community uses a term called neter or neteru. The word neter is where we get our word nature. And when you begin to study the cosmological stories of the ancient African or Nile Valley communities, we're going to explore the Memphite. It's the oldest one that we know, but there's other cosmological stories that comes right off the out of Africa. So we see here this individual known as Ptah, or this neter, okay, this representation of source. Ptah was an important deity in ancient Kemet, credited with creating the world, protecting the royal family, and listening to prayers. Same as our God, right? Or the God that we know of is in Genesis. It says that he was a symbol of creation. And as a creator deity, he was a maker of all living things in the universe. He was associated with metalwork, craftsmanship. Ptah symbolized divine rule. That's why he has the scepter. And was closely linked with the royal family. Ptah was often depicted with three symbols: the was, the scepter, the ankh. The three symbols was the scepter, the ankh, and the djed, the pillar thing, which represents your spine, and the energy that goes up and down. It's looked at as a energy scepter. Even Moses, the story of Moses, it says that his rod was magical. It was representative of this djed pillar that we see here. We're going to circle back to some of this stuff as we move through over the course of time. But I just wanted to kind of point some things out for you all as we move through tonight's presentation. So when we go to the book of Genesis, we want to start there. In the book of Genesis, chapter 1, we see it opens with, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And there's a hard stop, there's a period. And then it goes on and says, and the earth was without form, void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said. A couple of things I want to unpack here before we move deeper into this. After that first hard stop, in the beginning, God created heaven and the earth. If God has created something, it is done. I was taught that between Genesis 1 and 1, where that hard stop is, and Genesis 1 and 2, where the and begins, that something happened. And that's something that I was told was that's where Satan was kicked out of heaven. And as a result of being kicked out of heaven, he being kicked into the earth realm, he destroyed what was created and caused it to be without form and void. Okay, I bought that for a long time because I didn't understand that there's a creation story that helps you understand why there's a hard stop after the earth and then it begins again, because things are spiritual before they're natural. Things are spiritual before they're material. Everything starts with an idea. And so Source had an idea about heaven and earth, and it was. And then it took a deeper dive into it, the unfolding, and it says, and the earth was without form, void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said. And many of us gloss right over this, and we do so because Our theologians don't really understand what is being said here, the metaphysics behind this, the spiritual science that is behind this. And because they don't present it as a spiritual science, then we now run into the confusion of those who are presenting science without the spirituality to it. And as a result, we have even deeper confusion. But there's a book I want to introduce you guys to. This is hot off the press. I have a copy of it. It came out this year, and I highly recommend that you get it. Now, some of it may be over your head, but as you read it and as you begin to do deeper dives, this information will come in handy. It's called the Shabaka Stone. Now, if you've been around for the last 3 weeks, I've sent out a video which explains the Memphite theology, or introduce you to the Memphite theology, a video that explained the Shabaka stone. So I'm not going to take a lot of time recapitulating those things tonight, but I will make sure that when I send the replay of this out as part of your homework, you'll have access to those videos so you can come up to snuff and begin to develop your questions. Okay, good. So yeah, somebody said the Oscars. That's right. The Oscars, when you look at the Oscar itself, it is shaped like, it's formed like the image of Ptah, and it has the same attributes. It represents creativity, it represents excellence. So that's important. So this book, I'm going to suggest that you get it to help you understand the book you call the Bible, particularly the cosmological story you find in Genesis. Now, in this book, he talks about the Memphite theology, and on page 45, on chapter 2, he's talking about the philosophy or the primate of the essence, and he goes on and says, before the beginning began, none, that is an aspect of source, brings forth Ptah, who calls atom, where we get our word atom from, into being. This unity of three is the original Trinity. So when we talk about God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit, when we talk about God, Mary, and Jesus, many times when we talk about those trinities, the idea of those three comes from here. This is the first representation of the triad of source being triune. Now, all three of these represent one. The word tells us the Lord thy God is one. So even though you have Nun, Ptah, and Atum, many will say that the Africans or the ancient teachers were polytheistic. Well, they're just as polytheistic as us, we who are contemporary and say God can have the name of Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Tiskanu, El Shaddai, all the various names that we give, which represents aspects, but it's okay for contemporary theologians to break down source, God, into aspects, but it's not okay, or it's looked at as if we were illiterate and we had many gods. The Africans, the Egyptians did not have many gods. They didn't have any gods because they didn't have the concept of God. They had the understanding that source represents through its creation and through nature. That's where we get the word neter. Neteru is plural, meaning more than one. Okay, so that's important. But I want you to look here. You see, this is the same as Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Before the beginning began, none brings forth Ptah, who calls Adam into being. This unity of three is the original Trinity. Now, the Nun is the primordial matter, okay? That which has always been the eternal waters, okay? And then you have pata, the conversion of potential energy, which is at rest. So potential energy is energy that is at rest. It converts it into kinetic energy or motion. So energy is either resting or is motion. Energy cannot be destroyed, okay? It can be taken to a place of rest, or it can be moved to motion. We are the essence. We are created in His image, after His likeness. So here we're seeing the image and the likeness of what we are made of. Then he goes on and says that atom, which is the third of the Trinity, according to the Memphite theology, atom is the creative intelligence, the divine utterance, naming all and everything, bringing them into existence. This word atom is where we get the word Adam. When you look in Genesis, where man was given the responsibility of naming everything, whatever Adam named it, it was. And so here we see where that concept comes from. But we've taken the concept and we've made it into an individual. And even here, when you look at the nun, the pata, atum, these are aspects of the creator. They're not real people, okay? So symbols are everything. So the Commissions, they would have these symbols, these images. They didn't worship them. These images spoke to us. A picture is worth 1,000 words. What it takes 1,000 words to project one powerful image can do the job. So when we talk about the nun, when you see this image, I'm sorry, there's a typo here. That should be an N. Nun, nunette. And we're going to talk about that. The man was created, male and female was he created. Now, it wasn't talking about gender, because that's in Genesis 1. Remember, here's a key. Genesis 1 is creation, which is spiritual. Genesis 2 is matter, is material, okay? Spiritual always precedes material. And so when we hear in Genesis chapter 1, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, created he them, male and female, it was identifying the fact that source itself has two polarities. Energy has polarity. It has a positive polarity and a negative polarity. Now let's step outside of defining things from a Western mindset. When you hear positive, you hear good. When you hear negative, you hear bad. But that is not what is dictated here. Just like on a battery, you have a positive charge and a negative charge, and it takes both of those charges being working together to allow for that battery to produce the energy to run the systems and even to start that car. And the same with us. We must understand that we are both, we have a masculine and a feminine energy. Okay, now let's not confuse our masculine and feminine energy with our sexuality. That's a confusing point that goes on in the world today. I want you to look at this image, and can you see anything interesting about this image? Can you tell me whether this is the phenotype? No, now this is a spiritual concept, but it's being conveyed through the natural image that you see here. What do you find, or do you see anything strange about this particular image? Okay, so I don't see no hands or anything going on there, but I'm gonna help you out. When you look at this image, this clearly looks like a female, but it has a beard. So it's both masculine and feminine. And it has breasts. Many people look at this and will just see, oh, that looks like a man. They perceive that it's a man. But this image of none is actually none and nonette. None and nonette represents the primal waters, the eternal waters, the place of none. Okay, the place of no thing. When you go into meditation, you want to ultimately get back to the place of rest. You want to get back to the place where all exists, but is not manifesting. Everything that is to be created already was in existence in the waters of none. Now that's the cosmos. Okay, so what we're talking about here is a cosmological story at the same time. So we see the image of none. Okay, then there's the image of Ptah. We're looking at the Trinity. Okay, none moved. Through the movement, Ptah came forth. Ptah had the power of speech. Okay, and it, or particularly the power of thought, and through the thought, this is, now notice that even though these are three distinct images, they're really operating as one. Okay, so it's separated so you can understand how each plays in the creation story. All right, I see a hand up, so I'm going to go ahead. Real MC, if you want to say your name so I can make sure I'm pronouncing it properly, you have the mic. You can unmute yourself. Okay, Rue MC, I see your hand is up there. I actually unmuted you if you want to say something. Oh, I see you wrote in. Yes, that's right. You had a breast there. I didn't see that originally when you raised your hand. So I'm thinking that's what you raised your hands for. So we see Nun, Ptah, and lastly, we see an image of Atum, even though it's depicted as one. This beard always represents, usually this false beard was put on a female, but it represents male masculine, the divine masculine and divine feminine. And the carrier of the ox also represents divine feminine. The carrier of the scepter represents divine masculine. And the balance is necessary for you to move through life as a divine spiritual being. So these are the three that make up the original creation story. So when we ask, who is the us now? I want to slow it down a little bit. So you could say the us was Nun, Ptah, and Atum. But when you go back, you have to understand the us represent, or the three of them represent all things. Because as the Memphite story continues to unfold, you're going to have another generation of Neteru that represent aspects of source. When we look at Genesis chapter 1 and 2, we see that there's an evolving from Adam, the man, and Adam, the woman, to then there's others in the earth. There had to be others in the earth for them to ultimately begin to procreate with others. So that Genesis story as we know it is lacking when you put your thinking cap on. So we look in John chapter 1, as we wrap up for tonight, I'm talking about who is the us. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And all things were made by him. And without him was nothing, not anything made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. Now that's the rendition that is given to us by Western Christianity. But that rendition comes from the initial rendition that I gave you, where you find in the Shavaka stone where it says, before the beginning began, none brings forth Ptah, who calls, okay, spoken word, Adam into being. This unity of three is the original Trinity, the none being the primordial matter or the eternal waters, Ptah, the conversion of potential energy at rest into kinetic energy in motion, that which makes us creatives. We have a creative idea that we ultimately bring into formation by taking it into motion by imagination. And then the third aspect of who we are is atoms or creative intelligence. This is a divine utterance, naming all things and everything, bringing them into existence. So when you look at John 1, it's one of my favorite scriptures. It's in the beginning was, I read it like this sometimes. If you follow this guy by the name of Neville Goddard, he talks about the imagination. And he says John chapter 1 is the creative verse. In the beginning was the imagination. Okay? And the imagination was source. And the imagination was source. And all things were made by it. And without it, the imagination, was not anything made. In it was life. And the life was the light of men. Back to energy. So here's what I like you to know. That you are a creator based on the fact that you are created in its image after its likeness. You have the propensity to create like it did if you understand, first of all, your true alignment. Your true alignment is not that you are a human being, but you are a divine spiritual being. Now, many people will say that because they're saying it from their head. They're saying it from the faculty of reason. And some people can't even say it because it don't add up. If I'm God, why can't I do certain things? First of all, we have to understand to each of us is given a measure of godness. Okay? Can you imagine if all of us had God's, the spirit of source without measure? Okay? It would be just total calamity in the earth. But even the measure that each of us have is not activated, because the measure that you have is a spiritual thing and not a mental thing. Imagine man works right now through not mind power. Man operates inside of mental power. Mental power is expanded by experiences. Mental power is expanded by not only the experiences, but the knowledge that we gain through reading and research and those kinds of things. But that's limited, because if it wasn't limited, then man would be able to solve many of the things that it has not yet been able to solve. But then there's another part of man that once tuned in, tapped into, that man is made of the God stuff. That man is a new creation. Behold, all things, old things are passed away, and all things become new. You no longer are a man that is controlled by your mind, not your mind, controlled by your mental capacity, your physical capacity, or your emotional capacity. All three of those things limit your expression. It limits your true expression as a spirit being. Once you are born again, now when you hear that term born again, it becomes a religious term. But it never was meant to be a religious term. It was a science term, a spiritual science term. Once you are realigned, and the reason why you are realigned, because at one time you were in alignment with. Okay, so in Genesis 1, we had total alignment. Genesis 2, after receiving the assignment, after being dropped into these containers, being controlled by, ultimately being controlled by our reasoning, our five senses, controlled by our physical selves, controlled by what we like, controlled by our emotions. The spirit was disconnected. And so we have to have a reconnection. Most individuals who are walking in the earth realm today are controlled by the five senses. That's why I call them 5G people. Okay. But when you are reconnected and realigned, the five senses, the physical body, the emotional body, becomes subject to the spirit of man. And they all work in tandem. Religion tells you you have to bring those other into subjection and get rid of them. But spirituality, true spirituality tells you without this earth suit, you cannot live in this dimension that we're in. So we have to come to an understanding of an equilibrium between mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. And so that's where we're going. When we talk about the who is the us of creation, next week, I'm going to go into you are the us of creation. I believe, and I will substantiate it through a proof that we were all in the beginning. Think about this. Spirits, which are energy, cannot be destroyed. Matter of fact, it always has been. And we are created in the image after the likeness of the original spirit, which breathed part of its spirit into us. So we were in the beginning when it all happened. Now, when you realize that you were in the beginning, you understand that you're in the present. And you understand that you are not taking anything away from source by identifying with the aspect of source in you. That's why it says, let this mind, and the word mind has to do with consciousness. Let this consciousness be in you that was in Jesus. Okay, that sage. Every son of God, every savior that has come had a alignment with source, realizing that it was one with source. And when we come to the full realization, not just having a head knowledge, but when we have the hard knowledge that greater is it that is in each of us than the part of us that is in the world, then we'll be able to do great exploits. So I want you to stay tuned. Keep coming back. Next week, we'll go deeper into that. And I pray that you got something out of what I've shared this evening as we begin part 1 of Let Us. Who is the Let Us? Now, here's something I want you to know. The term let is a legal term. It's a term that means release. Like when you let a contract, you release something. So we see that the universe released an aspect of itself into that which it had created, and then breathed into its crowning creation, which is mankind, and man became a living soul. And so you have it. So we're going to wrap up tonight. We're going to go into a time of conversation. But before we go into the time of conversation, I will each week make an opportunity for those of you who desire to be a blessing to this ministry, would like to sow a seed. And this request is not made because there's a need on my part, but I always like to make space for the law of circulation to be put into actualization. So if you're interested in sowing a seed into this ministry, there's 3 different ways to give. You can do the traditional way. You can send it by snail mail, or you can go to that actual email address is no longer the place of possibilities. It's oasisspiritualcenter.com, or you can text to give, or you can actually go to, if you're using Zelle or Cash App, you can use the number 708-368-1076. Again, 708-368-1076. So I thank you. Giving is a sacred act of your acknowledgement of another's value in their life. All right, so let's talk about it. Before we close this evening, we're right at 8:07. I know some of you may need to drop off the line. Others of you may not have to drop off, and you want to participate in this conversation. So I'm going to ask you to let's talk about it. If you got a question, you could either put it in the feed, raise your hand. I'm gonna let all the hands down, so that way, let me see how I do this. Okay, so if anybody got a question, you can raise your hand. All the hands have been. Any aha moments? I believe there should be some aha moments. I don't believe I'm teaching something that is public knowledge. Some of you may have familiarity with it, but I don't think it's been taught or is being taught in the way that I've shared with you. So I want to make sure. Now, every week, I want you to know this. If there's no questions, then I question whether or not what either I'm teaching over your head or I'm missing you. So I want to make sure that if you have questions, please ask them. Or you can shoot them to me in an email, and every week what I'll do is take the question and I'll bring it forward in the following before the next class gets started, and we'll talk about the questions. And if you want to remain anonymous, you can do that. So I'm not going to prolong our time out here tonight. I thank you for your time, for my time is spent. I'm just going to go through this. Okay, and I don't see any questions there. So we're going to close it.